August 2024 was a fiery month for Nigeria. Citizens from all walks of life took to the streets to protest hardship. Tagged "End Bad Governance," protesters were calling for an end to corruption and rising cost of living. What made this protest different was the arrest of minors. Were they active participants or just an excuse for youthful exuberance? Young people were caught in the fray of the August 1st protest. What followed was a series of inexplicable events which shocked the world. When Nigerians took to the street to protest hardship, children came along for the ride, voicing their frustration over empty stomachs and broken promises. What began as a peaceful demand for accountability turned to a confrontation with security operatives.
And in the process, when Nigerians came out, they met with deadly and bloody, brutal attack, including killings. The worst part of it is that some of the people that have been killed were not even involved in the protests.
Protesters were arrested for destruction of public property and disorderly conduct. It soon emerged that minors were among the hundreds detained.
How can you charge a person who is less than 18 years or 15 years and whom you have not seen him with a gun? You have not seen him with a mob that were carrying arms and ammunition, and you say you are charging him for treason.
However, prosecutors insisted only adults were arrested.
These boys that we brought to the court today, all of them are adults. Most of them are married men. None of them is a minor. Some of them are university graduates. The small kids you are seeing here, they came with some of their parents to come and greet their loved ones. They are not even the real suspects standing trial in this case.
Even though the government eventually withdrew the case and released the minors, their lives will never be the same. Aminu, one of the detained minors, is suffering psychological problems.
Yanzu haka akwai yaron da mun kai psychiatric hospital. Ana tisa-tisansa saboda yana abu abnormal ba yadda yake da ba, saboda yanayin isolation din da aka mai, sannan da mutanen da aka hada su da shi inda aka kai su sas aka aje su.
This documentary investigates the aftermath of Nigeria's End Bad Governance protest. Nigeria's over 200 million strong population is reeling from the effects of unemployment and underemployment. The situation has driven many to extreme poverty. Basic needs like food, healthcare, and education have become unattainable luxuries for millions. Inflation in Nigeria has soared to unprecedented levels. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's declaration of the removal of subsidy on petrol sparked a chain of reaction. First, panic buying and long queues at fuel station. Then the price of goods skyrocketed at the market. The ripple effect of inflation spared no one. The outrageous cost of living ignited citizens. Many turned out on the streets demanding government accountability.
The realities of the country over the last years or couple of years is that there has been an increasing exclusion of young people in most parts of the country, particularly in the northern part of the country. And key drivers of this exclusion were, one, the high level of uneducated children or out-of-school children in many parts of northern Nigeria. Today, we think there are about 18 to 20 million children out of school, and of which over 80% of them are from the northern part of the country. And so when the major reforms started, the government reforms, particularly the increasing liberalization of the economy, withdrawal of subsidy, the liberalization of the foreign exchange, and the impact on inflation, and particularly food inflation, had further triggered so much reaction, because this population that I just finished describing constitute the most vulnerable elements of our society, and therefore there has been more of an intolerable hardship on that population, and naturally you get some of those kind of reactions. And many of them who came out to protest, one is a reaction to their socio-economic condition, which is poverty, exclusion, inequality, lack of education, lack of basic services, and their over-concentration in certain urban slums. So that is probably more like a ready army for such protests.
2024's End Bad Governance protest was by no means Nigeria's first outreach. For years, tension have been building. On the 1st of January 2012, President Goodluck Jonathan had to deal with 2 weeks of protest tagged Occupy Nigeria. The protest followed attempts to remove fuel subsidies. The price of fuel at that time was increased from 65 naira per litre to about 141 naira per litre. By 2020, another round of protests demanding an end to police brutality. The End SARS protest was youth-led. It focused on curbing the excesses of the Nigerian police force. The infamous Lekki Tollgate attack still lingers in the minds of many Nigerians. No matter the circumstances, there are always people willing to divert the course of protests to loot and destroy.
When you are dealing with the people who don't respect right and who does not care about the country image and reputation, and who happen by chance to be in leadership position, whether at local or at state or at national level, this is exactly what you will see. They don't care about the reputation of the country. They don't care about the right of the people. For goodness sake, how can you go and keep children under age in custody of, mixing them with hardened, suspect criminals? You mix them. They have not been changing clothes. They have not been bathing. They have been starving. You could see that they are languishing in hunger. That alone is a brutal violation of the children's right. So, but because there's no consequences, people just decide to do what they are doing. What we are even worried about, we did not even know exactly whether some of the children were even alive, whether some of the children in the course of detention, they have given up. We did not know, because there's no truth that is coming out from the authority, from the security. And in any decent country, whoever presided over the affairs of the arrest and detention and maltreatment of the children, that kind of person must not only resign, but must also meet with the consequences of what he or she had contributed in putting the nation in a shame.
The minors arrested during the End Bad Governance protest were incarcerated for 3 months, languishing in custody without charge or bail. Parents and relatives in search of their loved ones cried for help, demanding the release of their children, but were met with bail conditions that were far from their reach. Ibrahim Abubakar recounts his experience.
We spend no less than 300,000 naira. Because there are, if you go to the SWAT office, you just cry for this country. The level policemen are asking for money just for an information you want to know about a person you wish to see. Every movie you make, people ask for money. So there are some small things I can, because there are no evidence, but I can stand for myself. I can swear by the Holy Quran that I was involved in doing this for me to see my brother. So the money we give, it has no effect. In fact, we gave her this money for over 4 weeks, promising us that tomorrow he is going to be released. Probably tomorrow he is going to be released. And we were hoping. In fact, at the end of the day, we become hopeless. But when I look at the charges that was made and the numbers of those children that were involved, I become very skeptical that this money I gave out was just a money that went down the drain. Because it wasn't an individual matter. It's a collective issue.
After calls by well-meaning Nigerians and the international community for the government to drop the charges against the protesters, a viral video showing the ill condition of the minors compelled the government to dismiss the case.
So the video that went viral was the video that these boys were fighting over the food. Some were picking the pieces of rice on the ground. This one will give his fellow brother water, he will just gulp up a little. This one will give. That was what was happening. So when this video went viral, America, France, UK, people were saying, what is happening in this country? How can you bring an underage children to a court? And the most embarrassing scenario was the High Court judge says that they have been given a bail, but the terms of the bail is 10 million naira. The world was shocked.
Even though the minors have been released, the harsh treatment they face in detention has scarred them for life. In Kano, about 76 people, including minors, were arrested. Trust TV tried to speak to some on camera, but most declined. Their experiences in detention were so traumatizing that they are scared of being arrested again. After days of searching, some finally agreed to speak. Usman Pato, one of the minors arrested, spent about 3 months in custody. He's no longer the same person. According to his brother, his character has been altered because of the time he spent with hardened criminals.
Kafin ya tafi, akwai abubuwa da baya yi. Yanzu bayan ya dawo, akwai abubuwan da yake wanda kana gani kasan cewa akwai matsala. Kamar misali, idan aka aike shi, misali aiken da bai fiye minti 5 ya dawo ba, sai 1 hour bai dawo ba. Kuma an ce ina ya tafi zai ce can ya tafi. So kuma ba can ya tafi ba, ya wuce wani gurin ne, ko kuma kawai misali a dan yi masa wani abu wanda bai ji daɗin sa ba, kawai sai ya tafi wani guri haka ba a kira shi ba fa, kawai sai ya tafi ya je ya zauna a gurin ya huta, guri mai nisa fa, sai kuma ya dawo gida, kuma in ya dawo ya zo ya ce ga inda ya je. So kaga ai wannan duk ba abu ne wanda yake na hankali ba. Asibitin da aka ajiye su na nan Kano, so sun nemi su gana da ni, naji mun yi magana da su akan cewa wannan matsalar akwai ta. Sai suka ce to amma za su kira ni domin a dora shi akan magani, akwai wani ƙwararren likita wanda zai zo ya duba shi, za su yi min waya sai mu je. To har yanzu ba su kira ni ba. Sun gaya min abin da yake faruwa da shi kaman cuta ne wanda yake na mantuwa haka ya same shi. Sun gaya min kaman cuta ne na mantuwa, za a abu kawai zai manta wani lokacin kuma ba zai manta ba. Shine abin da ya same shi.
Usman clearly remembers how he was arrested by the police while running an errand for his mother.
Kati aka aike ni siyowa MTN, aka bani 1000, ina fita nan Mangorori inda muka haɗu da ku yanzu. Kawai shi aka kama ni, naga ana gudu ni kuma ban gudu ba, kawai ma'aikatan suka zo suka kama ni. Da suka kama ni na Mandori ne, sai aka kai ni can State CID na kwana 2 ga sauro ga yunwa nan ma kwanan mu biyu babu sallah a wajen ba su damu da kai sallah ba kakkai. Sai na samu wani bawan Allah an fito da mu dama 4 ga wata ran da aka kama mu, sai ranar 6 ga wata ranar talata sai na bashi lambar waya, sai ya kirawo sai ce dan Allah ai sauri a zo. Sai dakta ya zo da shi da mahaifina, da aka kai mu 6 ga wata aka kai mu Abuja. Sai aka kirawo mu 10 ga wata aka fito da mu gaba daya mu 76 10 ga watan nan. Da aka fito da mu sai aka ce mu kira iyayenmu a turo mana da kudin abinci. Ko ni a lokacin sai da aka tura mun 15,000 a ranar 15,000 aka tura mun, sannan ba sa faɗa inda, ba su bari ka faɗi inda kake ba saboda cewa akai ba a san inda muke ba. Ce mana ma akai kashe mu za a yi an rufe mu dan ba ma za mu dawo ba, abinda aka ce mana kenan.
The government made many promises to rehabilitate the children, but it seems the condition is worse. Here is Abba Adamu after detention, back on the streets of Kano selling slippers.
Ni gaskiya ni ban yi laifi ba, ban san laifin da ne ba. Saboda ka gani na faɗa maka fa 1 ga watan nan da ake zanga-zanga ma ni ina gida. Kaga 2 ga wata 3 ga wata duk ina wajen aiki. 4 ga wata da aka ce an cire kafiyu da aka sa a nan Kano, to sai na fito siyan kayan aiki aka kama ni, kuma an kama ni ne ni kadai a hanya. Kaga ni ban san wani laifi da nayi ba gaskiya. Don ko abun fai din da nake cewa ni fa bana cikin yan zanga-zanga da ake cewa wai zanga-zanga da tuta, suka ce sai na daga wannan tutar. Kan ban daga bane duk suka ji mu wannan ciwukan suka dake ni. Amma ni ban san wani abu da nayi ba gaskiya na laifi. Tun daga nan Kano ma har muka je kawo kusan wata 1 mu muka yi a can kafin a raba mu biyu. Ba wani abincin da zaka ci, dama garin kwaki ne. Teban nan so ɗaya aka kawo. Tun ranar da muka fara cewa muna jin yunwa muna faduwa. Wallahi garin kwaki na 200 idan aka sai aka jika sai kowa ya sha mu 76. Gwangwani ɗaya wallahi. Still dai abin da ya sa muka daina karatu ai hali ne na yau da gobe, babu iyayenmu ba su da shi, mu muke taimaka musu. To kaga har yanzu ni nake taimakawa gida a kasuwancin da nake fita, don sai shekaran jiya ma na fara fita. Kuma asalin gun da nake yanzu ba fa anan nake ba, saboda lokacin da muna Abuja nan ana tura mana kuɗin abinci da yawa. Iyaye kaga mamanmu ta sai da filinta, ta sai da awaki haka da 'yan kadarori dai ya wajen ya za a fito ana dai ta kashe kuɗi gaskiya. Har wasu abubuwan na jarin takalmi na ma duka babu yanzu. To da na dawo gida na samu wannan halin kuma cewa za a ba mu jari, gaskiya har yanzu ba a ba mu ba. To akwai wani daga ciki waɗanda aka kama din nan mu 76, to akwai yayan wani daga ciki, saboda zaman da muka yi a gurin mun saba. To suna zuwa irin zumunci haka tunda an daɗe a tare. Sai babanmu sai yake gaya masa cewa shi ai har yanzu Abba bai fara fita kasuwa ba. Sai ya ce me yasa? Sai ya ce ai babu jari. Sai ya ce to abinda za a yi in zo jiya kenan Litinin Monday, sai ya ce in zo kasuwar Sabon Gari, zai ci gaba da bani takalma ina sayarwa. To jiya ma ya fara ban kayan nake yawo yanzu. Kaga da ba yawo nake ba, amma yanzu ban takalman nake yawo nake sayarwa.
For 93 days, these children endured unimaginable pain. They languished without proper food, medical care, or hope for release. This, according to a human rights lawyer, is a violation of their civic liberty, and the government is to be held accountable.
Going by what the provisions of the law state, if you look at Section 35 of the Constitution, which guarantees the right to personal liberty, Section 35 provides, I think particularly subsections 5 and 6, provide that any person who is arrested should be charged to court, should be taken to court within 24 hours of their arrest, or if there's no court within a 40-kilometer radius, within 48 hours of that arrest. Now, the fact that we know for a fact that these these Nigerians, and several other Nigerians, by the way, were detained longer than this constitutional time limit. The question now arises as to whether a proper remand order was obtained, for their remand, or whether they were detained, extrajudicially. If they were detained extrajudicially, then of course there has been an infringement on their fundamental rights to personal liberty. And what Section 35 provides for is that any person, irregardless of whether they are found innocent or guilty, once that right is infringed upon, they are entitled to compensation and an apology. So it's the same problem we have with pre-trial detention, but that's not the question that you asked. But specifically back to this point, on the issue of the length of arrest, pending trial or maybe during trial or whatever the case is, once it is discovered that, they were arrested and detained for a longer period than what the Constitution provides for, then they're entitled to reliefs, whether or not they are found innocent or guilty or what, irregardless of the crime. And the reason why the law does this is because the law exists to balance to protect the weak from the strong, to ensure that the strong do not overpower the weak. And government has all the might of the federal government. So number one, on the issue of the arrest, the question is whether the arrest was legal, in terms of whether it complied with the provisional constitutions. Then on the issue of the detention also, whether the detention is also legal. Then thirdly, on the question of the charges being preferred against them. Because when you look at the entire situation, you ask yourself, look at the persons being charged and look at the charges being brought. And then you ask yourself, okay, are these charges politically motivated? What is the objective of using taxpayers' money to prosecute these cases that most likely may not go anywhere at the end of the day, against persons who, against whom you cannot even prove the mental element? I'm just, speaking, as an onlooker, but the question is whether their rights have been infringed upon. If we look at the facts, and there's a high probability that they have been infringed upon, then the agencies should be held accountable and responsible.
The fight for justice in Nigeria always comes at a cost. Parents of the arrested minors do not have the financial capacity to press charges, but are patiently waiting for the promises made by the government to be fulfilled.
Gaskiya a yanzu ba abin da gwamnati ta yi mana, walau ta federal government, walau ta state government. So abin da kawai gwamnatin state government ta ce za ta yi shine waɗanda suke makaranta za ta ɗauki nauyin ci gaba da karatunsu. Waɗanda suke 'yan kasuwa ne a ciki za ta ba su jari don su sustaining na kasuwancin su ci gaba. So amma gaskiya ko ɗaya a wannan ba wanda ya yi, sun dai alƙawari, kuma waɗanda aka ce suna makaranta mun ɗauki takardunsu mun je mun kai office na Commissioner of Education na jihar Kano mun kai mai. So amma har yanzu ba wani follow up da su suka yi remanding ɗinmu ko kuma mu muka yi musu gaskiya, tunda da yawa daga cikinsu yaran 'yan secondary school ne, waɗanda suka gama jiniya suka gama SS ba su da yawa, suka yi SCE ba su da yawa, to su kuma wasu takardunsu ba su kyau ba, to mun ɗauka mun kai cewa a biya musu kuɗi su risitin na exam ɗinsu yadda za su samu score mai kyau su ci gaba da karatu. Har yanzu ba ko ɗaya wannan ba abin da.
In the aftermath of the End Bad Governance protest, nothing seems to have changed. The government is yet to meet the demands made during the protest. Price of foodstuffs are still rising high in the market. The cost of living is biting harder.
The sad part about the state generally, and the Nigerian state in particular, it is always a poor student of history. It never learned. That's the unfortunate part of it. Look, since colonial time, the immediate reaction to protest is arrest and detention, repression. Some of those repressive actions, you could set up policy to stop protest and ban protest, or you could require that people seek police permission or approval to protest. And this has been consistently the trend. You can see the reactions of Nigerians when it was clear that children were arrested and detained in Abuja. Unfortunately, what many Nigerians didn't also know is the reports we are getting is that there are still many of these children in different detention centers at state level. A lot of them have still not been released. It's just that the ones that happened in Abuja was at the glare of the federal government, and there was a reactions from the center, and therefore got those children released. But available reports is also showing that there are so many of them in some northern states, that children that are still under detention. And these are things that human rights organizations and the media will need to unearth to actually understand this trend. Government needs to find a way to responding to citizens' grievances. It is one thing for the government to recognize that these protests or that things are bad or things are hard. But it is another thing for the government to act in a manner that it ameliorates the situation. So when you say things are bad, but you still continue with that same thing, it just gives a clear decision that you probably didn't care. I think that's what Nigerians are feeling, that the government didn't care. It's because you may recognize and appreciate the situation I am in, but what I expect you is to do something.
The release of the protesters was only a small win in a large scheme of things. If any lesson is to be learned from the history of protest in Nigeria, it is that a temporary calm is not always a good sign.